So back in 1997, I had a huge car accident. It left me with some life-changing injuries, one of which is a huge scar on my arm. You may be able to see it there, you may not, in the lights. So I spent weeks in hospital recovering from the accident, and then for a further year I had to have occupational therapy and regain the use of my hand and arm. So about a year after the accident, I was awarded a payout of over £50,000, which in today's money is a hell of a lot, and I'll put it in the titles on the screen so you can see. I'll work it out. All the time I'd been recovering and convalescing from my accident, I'd been thinking about what to do with the money. I knew I was getting some money, I didn't know how much, but I knew it would be a fair chunk of change. And like all young men, I'd always wanted to drive a fancy car. A car that came out around that time was the Mark I Audi TT, and I loved the look of it. I'd never driven one. At the time, it was futuristic looking. It was amazing. I was so impressed by this car that I put posters of it on my wall, and I just knew I really wanted one. And I waited and waited and waited, and eventually I got this payout. I was so excited about getting this car that as soon as the check landed, I went straight to the Audi garage in Dartford, in Kent, in the UK. I was only 24 years old at the time. It was a year after the accident. I was 23 when the accident happened, obviously. And there was a sales guy in there. I remember him quite well. He was a blonde guy. He was quite tall. I came in. I was obviously looking around, and he said to me, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I'd like to test drive the Audi TT, please." Now, I didn't tell him that I had this money. I didn't tell him I wanted to buy the car. I just said I wanted to test drive it. I thought it would be a wise idea to test drive the car first. I should have actually test driven it in the previous 6 months, but I didn't. For whatever reason, I didn't. I was just convinced I wanted to buy it. He said to me anyway, he said, "Take a seat over there and I'll be with you shortly." So I went and sat down in this waiting area, and he sat down just at his desk, which was only 10, 12 yards away from me. And he was doing some paperwork and making a few calls, and I thought, fine, he's getting things ready. Anyway, I sat there and sat there and sat there. Over an hour went by, and he still hadn't acknowledged me or even said, "Sorry to keep you waiting, it won't be long." And I kept thinking I should ask him. I thought, no, he'll be with me in a minute. After an hour, I kind of plucked up the courage to go up to him and say, "Any idea on, how long it will be before the test drive?" And I kid you not, he looked at me and he said, "Oh, are you still here?" He made me feel really small. And I said, "Well, yeah, you asked me to sit over there and wait for the test drive." And with that, he said, "Oh, okay." And he just stood up, he scooped up these keys off his desk, and he said, "Come on then." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I followed him out. We got in the car. He was in the driver's seat, and he drove the car onto the road and started driving. I was still excited despite what had just happened. I was still excited about it because I was there to buy my dream car, and I was asking him questions, like what's the 0 to 60 speed, what's the fuel consumption, things like this. He was just grunting one-word answers back at me. He didn't look at me. He didn't make any conversation. He seemed pissed off. That's the only way I can describe it. I asked him, I said, "Can I have a go of the car?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll pull in the lay-by up here, you can have a go." So he did. He pulled in, we swapped places. I started having a go of the car. And while I was driving, I was asking him more questions, but he wouldn't even look at me. He just turned his head, looked out of the passenger window, and barely grunted one-word answers at me. It was just so rude as to be unbelievable. Had he acted like that towards me at my age now, obviously, I would have reacted very differently. But back then, I kind of took it, and he just made me feel really, really small. I felt absolutely awful. I was trying to engage with him. I wanted, him to get me excited about the car. I was already very excited about the car, but I wanted him to add to that and create. I'd been dreaming about this car for a year. He had a sale in his bag. All he had to do was be half a decent human being, but he couldn't find himself to do that. He had obviously took a look at me. Back when I was 24, back then when I went in to purchase the car, I looked very young for my age. I probably looked about 18. I was in jeans, I was in t-shirt, I looked scruffy, I had stubble. So he probably took one look at me and thought, well, this is just some, this is just some kid wanting to come in and test drive an Audi TT. There's no way he can afford it. So he just left me sitting in the corner hoping I'd go away. And when I did push him to go on the test drive, he reluctantly went and then just treated me like I was a piece of shit on his shoe. Anyway, he only let me drive the car for 2 or 3 minutes, and he basically had directed me straight back to the garage, and we pulled in the forecourt. I'd had a go for a few minutes. I tried to engage with him, but he wasn't interested. Anyway, we got out of the car, and he said, "Give me the keys," and I gave him the keys, and he just turned around and started to walk away. And I actually said to him, "Hey, aren't you going to invite me in?" And he said, "What for?" And I said, "Well, to sell me the car." And he said, "There's not much point, is there?" And at that point, I wish I could tell you that I put him in his place and I did some heroic thing and everything. But being really honest, I just did not have the confidence at that age to deal with him as he should have been dealt with. And all I said to him was, I told him the story. I just said to him, well, the thing is, I said, I've just been given a cheque for over £50,000. And I actually pulled it out of my back pocket and I went and showed him the cheque so he could see it. And I think my hand was even trembling a bit at the time. The adrenaline going through me of the way he was treating me and how upset I felt. And he saw this cheque and I explained, look, I had this big car accident. I showed him my arm. And I explained what happened. I said, I've just got this cheque. It was enough to buy the car more than twice over. What happened next was even more disgusting and made me feel even more sick, because if he'd have kept up his demeanour of being, moody and pissed off and things like that, it would have sat better with me. But the change in him was so comical that if it had been in a film, you wouldn't believe it. You say, well, that's a bit fake. No one could switch from being that much one way to that much this way. But he did. He switched from being a total arsehole to treating me like royalty, being the nicest guy on the planet. And he said, oh, why don't you come inside? I'll make you a coffee. We can go through the paperwork. It's such a pleasure to have you here. And it made me feel even more sick listening to his bullshit that he was now coming out, because it was just fake. Because a few minutes earlier he was treating me like a piece of shit, and now all of a sudden I'm being treated like royalty because I can afford this car. Well, I didn't have the confidence to tell him what I thought of him, unfortunately. But I had enough about me to say, look, I'm busy at the moment. I'll come back in a couple of days. He then asked me for my details. He took my name and phone number and he quickly wrote it down. I did give it to him. And I just went away feeling absolutely awful. I went home. I tore all the Audi TT posters down off my wall. I did not want that car anymore. His attitude had hey, who knows? Maybe you're watching this. The guy who didn't sell me the car, maybe you're watching this and maybe you're thinking, shit, that was me. Highly unlikely you're watching it, but you never know. If you are watching it, you were a total dick. I'll tell you now, I didn't tell you back then, you were the biggest dick on the planet. I'm sure you know anyway, but just in case you don't, you were a dick. You cost yourself a sale, you cost your company a sale, you cost yourself commission. I'm now an ex-sales director. Back then I wasn't even in sales. The way you behaved as a salesperson, a sales professional, was absolutely unforgivable. In fact, the way you behaved as a human being was absolutely unforgivable. But there you go. I went home feeling sick. I took the posters down off my wall, and I for about a week I moped around really upset. Anyway, I started researching other cars, because the Audi TT now was just a no-go for me. I could not buy that car, despite it being my dream car, despite it being the car I'd had on my wall, despite me looking at Audi TTs for the past year, and every time one went past me thinking, yeah, I'm going to have that car. I just looked at them and felt sick. He made me feel that way. Such is the power of what people have in the way they treat you, I suppose. But anyway, I researched other cars and I found this car called a Lotus Elise. Anyway, I was a bit hesitant this time, so I phoned the dealership. It was HR Owen, the dealership in Canary Wharf in London, and I spoke to this lovely Australian guy. And if you are an Australian guy and you ever worked in HR Owen in Canary Wharf in 1998, then props to you, because you were a very decent human being. I spoke to this guy, and I thought he's going to be the same as the other guy. But I just said, I'd like to test drive a Lotus Elise. And he said, where do you live? I told him, and he said, well, I live about 20 miles away. He goes, I'll take a car home tonight and I'll pass by you in the morning. How about I come to your house with the car and we do a test drive from your house? Not, you have to come here or this, that. I thought, yeah, that's good. So he did. He came the next morning. I went outside. He let me drive it from the off. I got in the car. He let me drive it for half an hour all around the streets I know. And oh my God, I'm so glad that Audi TT salesman was an arsehole, because this car blew the Audi TT away. It was a real sports car. It went like shit off a shovel. It did 0 to 60 in ridiculous 5.5 or something. The handling on it was amazing. It was truly stunning. It gripped the road. It's like driving a go-kart, a Lotus Elise. I don't know if you've ever driven one or been in one, but it is an amazing car. It's like a little baby supercar, but for a fraction of the price. It was absolutely brilliant. Convertible, all that kind of thing. And this guy, the car was amazing, but had this guy treated me like something that he scraped off his shoe, then likewise I wouldn't have bought it. It's all about how you're treated by people at the end of the day. But this guy couldn't have been nicer. He didn't make any assumptions about me. He let me test drive the car. We had a good laugh. He treated me as a friend and respectfully. And when I got back to my house, that was it. That car, I wanted it so badly. I invited him in, and then I told him the story of what happened to me in the car accident and everything. And he was just, it's not like his eyes even lit up with dollar signs thinking, great, I've got a sale. He just seemed very compassionate about it and said, look, I'm really sorry to hear about your accident. I'm glad you're okay now. Made me like him even more, made me want the car even more. This guy knew what he was doing, or he was just genuinely compassionate. Anyway, I signed the paperwork then and I got that Lotus Elise. It was absolutely fantastic. The lesson of this, obviously, is never judge a book by its cover. And just try and be a decent human being, I suppose, is the other lesson. I mean, the first guy was an absolute tool, a real arsehole. The second guy couldn't have been nicer. He didn't judge me. The first guy was judgmental, and he did. He looked at me. As human beings, I don't think we should look at people and judge them. But also, if you're a sales professional, if you're looking at someone and thinking, well, they can't afford this, they can't afford that, I'll tell you here and now, you're making an absolutely catastrophic mistake. As a professional salesperson, what that Audi guy could have done is, okay, he could have looked at me, he could have made his assumptions about me, he could have thought that guy looks really young, he can't afford the car, but you never know. And he could have just said to me, yeah, sure, you can have a test drive of this car. Are you thinking of buying one? I would have said, yeah. And then he would have said, okay, and if you are buying one, would you like to go ahead on a finance option, or would you be paying cash? Probably thinking in his mind, there's no way this kid's paying cash. But I would have then told him the story. I could have said, well, actually, I'm paying cash. I've got this check. And I would have told him the same story I told him after the test drive. And then, no doubt, he would have treated me like royalty from the get-go, and he would have got a sale. Even though I wasn't that impressed with the car, because it was my dream car and I wanted it for a year, I would have bought that Audi TT that day had he just treated me with a bit of courtesy, a bit of professionalism, a bit of respect. He totally fluffed his lines and was an idiot. So lack of intelligence, lack of emotional intelligence, lack of professionalism. Maybe he was having a terrible day. I don't know. But that guy, well, even if he was having a terrible day, actually, there's no excuse for that behaviour from a salesperson. As an ex-sales director now, I can tell you, if that guy worked for me and he behaved like that, I'd sack him. It's inexcusable behaviour as a salesperson. The other lesson to take from this is, if this, to be honest, I don't think it would happen to me now, because people would look at me now and think, well, he's not an 18-year-old kid, He's walking around with his grey stubble. He's probably of a certain age, shall we just say. And they'd probably think, well, he may have some money, so we'll treat the guy with respect. But had the salesperson acted like that towards me now, I would have acted very differently back towards him. And now I do have the confidence to put people in their place. And a good lesson for young people maybe watching this is, sometimes as a young person, you do naturally defer to older people. You don't, if they're treating you a certain way, you may not have the confidence to stand up to them just because they're older. Something I've learned as I've got older is generally, people don't really improve their intelligence levels if they get older. Quite often, actually, people get dumber as they get older. You can have, even with more experience, people can kind of, their intelligence doesn't necessarily increase. So if you're a young person watching this, understand if you're about 23, 24, 25, 26, whatever age you are, if you're talking to a guy in his 30s, 40s, don't naturally defer to them. If you're in the right, try and have the confidence to challenge them if you're in the right. I didn't have the confidence. I wish I had the confidence I have now, because I would have put that guy in his place. But if you're young, believe in yourself, have confidence if you are right. Obviously, it's all about having the right ethics, moral compass, values, that kind of thing. But if you know in your heart you've got good values, you're a decent person, don't be frightened to stand up for yourself either. So a few lessons there, and thanks for listening. And I'll come back with some other stories next time. And but this is just an informal chat as I get my YouTube channel going. But I'm going to be coming with some more formal, structured lessons about all sorts of things soon. So see you then. Cheers.